The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's BATIC Institute webinar on the Federal Highway Administration Project Closeout Mapping Process. My name is Susan Howard. I'm the Program Director for Transportation Finance at AASHTO and Director of the BATIC Institute. Today's webinar will be approximately an hour in length and include speakers from FHWA, the Vermont Agency of Transportation, and the Ohio Department of Transportation. The presenters will be followed by a Q&A session. The presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. So if you have questions at any point during the webinar, please submit them using the questions box. Before getting started, let's review a few logistical items. You should have received an email with a link to the PowerPoint presentations for today. If you did not receive this email, please visit the BATIC Institute website at financingtransportation.org. A copy of the PowerPoint is available there for download. All participants will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. As I mentioned, at any time, you can submit a question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel for our live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the BATIC Institute website by the end of the day tomorrow. As background, the BATIC Institute is an educational center that helps state DOTs and their local agency partners analyze, understand, and use project finance techniques to advance transportation projects within their states. We help build this capacity through a program of training, sharing of best practices, and online educational services like this webinar. The BATIC Institute is a cooperative agreement in partnership with the Federal Highway Administration, and you can find out more about the BATIC Institute and our various resources at our website, which is financingtransportation.org. Today's webinar will explore the FHWA Project Closeout Process and Mapping Initiative developed to help state DOTs streamline the process. We'll hear from Jeff Blaze, Financial Program Manager with FHWA, on the workshop series that Federal Highways has developed to introduce the mapping process with state DOTs. We'll then hear from Mike Lozier with the Vermont Agency of Transportation and Division Office on Vermont's Project Closeout Mapping experience. This will be followed by a similar presentation with Alana Haberman and Jessica Patterson from Ohio DOT and the FHWA Ohio Division Office, respectively. Daniel Balsley with the Ohio DOT will conclude the session with a demonstration of an automated technology platform that ODOT developed to help facilitate the project closeout process. And then during the final 15 minutes or so of the webinar, our speakers will be available to answer questions submitted by today's audience. With that, I think we're ready to get started. I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Blaze with Federal Highway Administration Resource Center Financial Services Team. I'd like to thank Susan and AASHTO for coordinating this webinar on Project Closeout. Over the last few years, Project Closeout has become a focus of FHWA, not just for managing inactive projects, but now with 2 CFR 200 requirements, closing projects at specified times is required. One tool to help identify issues with closing projects is a FHWA process mapping workshop. Process mapping is a tool in the larger context of business process improvement. Improving your process typically starts with documenting how it works today, what we call the as-is process. FHWA creates a detailed process diagram in the form of a swim lane diagram. And the map pictured is from New York State DOT mapping workshop. It's probably the most amount of swim lanes we've mapped, which had over 30 swim lanes. So this is what doing a process mapping workshop is. And then swim lanes is just what we call each organizational unit that we're putting on the diagram. New York was interested in shortening the New York City time from PS&E approval to construction notice to proceed, which was 2 years, and was leading to funds management issues like inactive projects. A little history of how we got to process mapping workshops. In 2011 and 12, the Federal Highway Administration Program Management Improvement Team, also known as PMIT, conducted a National Review 1 on Project Closeout. One of the outcomes of the review was to begin process mapping Project Closeout process in state DOTs. So in 2013, the PMIT completed the first 9 Project Closeout process mapping workshops under their National Review 2 on Project Closeout. An outcome of that was putting together a process mapping team from Federal Highway to facilitate this workshop at state DOTs. Since 2017, this process mapping team has visited 17 states, mostly on Project Closeout, but 2 workshops were on project development and another on PS&E approval to construction notice to proceed. Now I'd like to do a quick poll. Has your state participated in a FHWA process mapping workshop? A process mapping workshop from Federal Highway is typically a 2.5 to 3.5 day workshop. We interview personnel involved with Project Closeout from all organizational units. This includes people involved in the Project Closeout from construction, regions and central office, LPA, programming, planning, finance and accounting, preliminary engineering and design, real estate acquisition, and some special projects like rec trails or CMAC, and of course the FHWA division office. The map that's created is a nice tool for organizations, but the discussions and ideas that are generated during the 2.5 day workshop are really the key takeaways. Having all units participate and listen to what others in the organization do with their part of the project often leads to aha moments. We've heard different conversations or comments like, I thought when I'm done with my part, the project was closed. Or, you need that to close the project with FHWA? I could get that to you 4 to 5 months ago. All of these ideas and comments that take place are captured in sticky notes. One, because we need to focus on getting the process map completed, all the swim lanes, but the follow-up actions by the DOT are really the key, and we want to capture some of the comments and questions that take place during the workshop. And so this picture is one state where we had sticky notes going up on the wall. But the workshop is just a starting point. It helps identify where some of the process issues take place. We've heard really great report backs from states about cutting time to close projects or reevaluating their procedures. Many states go back and look at their federal project end dates as well as their period of performance to bill FHWA projects. One of the states that followed up with us after a workshop shared their before and after results in a diagram. So this diagram is the current capital final voucher process. This is a snippet from this process that a follow-up team had produced from one of the Federal Highway process mapping workshops. They looked at each step in the process and determined which steps add value and which ones are redundant. So this is the beforehand, and then after the group met, they identified all these X's that could go through and be removed because they were redundant activities. Their old process took about 21 months to close a project from the time construction is completed or accepted out in the field until it is closed in the FEMA system in Federal Highway. After going through and removing redundant activities, their target is to close a project in 9 months. And I think they were last check at around 15 months. So they had knocked off quite a bit of time. One key here is that the state DOT took a hard look at their internal procedures and processes. FHWA process mapping workshop opened some of their eyes and helped the state realize where they could make big improvements. But the follow-up and focus on improvements is what impacted their business process. Next, we're going to hear from Vermont DOT and Ohio DOT regarding what they did in their states after the process mapping workshop. Patrick Kirby will be kicking off the discussion with Vermont DOT.
Welcome and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am Patrick Kirby, the Finance Manager for the Federal Highway Administration Vermont Division, and I will kick things off with a short explanation of Vermont's roads and project closure redesign. Then I will turn it over to our star of the presentation, Mike Lozier, VTrans employee and continuous improvement extraordinaire. This process began with a series of events starting in December 2017 when our Federal Highway headquarters began an initiative to have all federal aid projects possess a period of performance end date in the new period of performance end date FEMA field. Prior to this, there was no requirement. Regulation came out in 2015 requiring it, and many of the projects within FEMA had end dates, such as VTrans, but they weren't in this specific field. They were in the remark section or somewhere else. To assist with this endeavor, our headquarters created what was called an end date tracker, which was created out of a business objects report, and this actually helped us determine the magnitude of the problem. The end date tracker highlighted 543 projects out of 1,020 meeting these dates. And again, many of these projects had the dates, but they were in another field within the FEMA, so there was work to be done. It also highlighted many other things, to include a few projects with payments that were made after an end date, which actually really shocked quite a few people within Vermont. So as we worked to address this issue, we heard that the project mapping team was actually in New Hampshire, neighboring state, and so a colleague here in the Vermont division and I went and observed one day of the 3-day training in December of 2018. As soon as we saw this program, we were hooked. It was an amazing event. It brought together all the state DOT offices who actually touched and felt federal aid projects. Once this was completed, we brought the project closure team to Vermont, where we conducted our own project closure process mapping in February of 2019. That was just 2 months after we saw this. So I give kudos to VTrans for putting this together quickly, getting all these players. It must have been 60 to 80 participants all together for 3 days at very short notice. They did a fantastic job. And this product was mapped out the current state of how VTrans actually closes a project. VTrans took this process to the next level and conducted a series of lean events to map out the future state. And then ultimately, their plan was to implement a new process on 1 October 2020. Their goals were to reduce the process from 36 months to 18 months, to reduce inactive projects by 50% or more, to reduce the number of projects opened after a period of performance end date to no more than 4, reduce the need to reopen a project after closure to 0, and then to reduce aging obligations to 0 or near 0. And an additional benefit that we found was in 2020, they de-obligated $10 million more in federal aid funds than in any other year over the past 5 to 8 years, which in my mind is an amazing feat. The icing on the cake, so to speak, is that VTrans created a leadership dashboard for continuous improvement. And to me, this is something that must be done, or all this hard work will fall by the wayside over time. This is something where leaders can go out, open it up, research a project, research the process, and ask questions to make sure that this continues for years to come. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Lozier, who will walk you through everything I just talked to after the mapping project closure event. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Lozier from the VTrans Performance section, and it's a privilege to be with you today to discuss the VTrans Project Closures Mapping and Continuous Improvement Project. First, some key project milestones. As Patrick mentioned, our project journey began in February of 2019 when VTrans hosted the FHWA Resource Center team for a mapping workshop. On the heels of this mapping workshop, VTrans entered planning for a lean event to address the project closures process. The event itself was conducted in 3 phases, one separate engagement for each phase in September, October, and November of 2019. Concurrent with and following the engagements, Over the next year, implementation and project and change management was performed. In September of this year, workflow deployment to production was completed, and later this month, dashboard development and deployment will be completed. The FHWA workshop included a comprehensive process mapping exercise with large bookends. As shown here, the FHWA process map was adapted to the smaller bookends for the contemplated lean event, with out-of-scope sub-processes for detailed mapping and analysis defined. As indicated, the lean event design included 3 phases. I will present the phase design here. Then, as an example for the remainder of the presentation, I will focus primarily on the planning, execution, and results for phase 1. The phase 1 engagement was first and focused on conventional capital program projects, or projects with 1, full oversight from the VTrans construction section, 2, administered and site manager, which is our construction management system, and 3, Final and Appian, a vendor-supported cloud application employed for conducting and administering the VTrans finals process. The phase 3 engagement was next and focused from the handoff to financial operations to the completion and sign-off of the final voucher by FHWA. The phase 2 engagement was conducted last and focused on non-site manager construction and other federally funded projects, with a common nexus with phase 1 for the handoff to phase 3. The external, intermediate, and final bookends, respectively, as defined for the VTrans closure process are project acceptance, closure notification, and final FHWA sign-off, which has an out-to-out duration define the time to close. For each engagement, the objective was to map current state, identify opportunities for improvement, map future state, identify key performance indicators and related metrics for tracking performance, and to develop an implementation plan. The baseline document for each lean event is the A3, which concisely captures the important details for the event. Shown here is a sample A3 for phase 1. In addition to the many event participants, including those on the facilitation team, process participants, subject matter experts, and stakeholders, whose contributions were vitally important, it is noted that strong sponsorship and devoted champions are critical to the success of any lean event. For this project, due to the collective process ownership by both the VTrans Highway and Finance and Administration divisions, that included dual sponsorship and champions as shown, namely Wayne Simmons, who is our Highway Division Chief Engineer, and Lenny LeBlanc, who is our Finance and Administration Chief Financial Officer, and champion Sue Scribner, who is our Program Director for Highway Municipal Assistance Bureau, and Diane Bigglestone from the Finance and Administration Accounting Unit. A second key component is identifying the goals for the project, which in this case are for increased process transparency and a reduction in the overall time required to close a federal aid project. An important artifact produced for the overall event, the time to close baseline timeline, is shown here. This artifact identifies both the phased concept for the engagement and the baseline timeline of 36 months to move a federal aid project from project acceptance to final voucher approval by FHWA. The primary goal entering the event was to reduce this time by half to 18 months. For each phase, and as adapted from the overall event process map, a concise, bookended current state map was produced and analyzed. One product of that analysis was a collection of opportunities for improvement, or OFIs, which provide a focus for future state design. For each phase, critical documentation was produced, including an engagement summary report and an implementation plan task list. The task list was monitored, discussed at scheduled check-ins, and updated throughout the life cycle of implementation to keep the project on schedule and as a project and change management tool for project team members and end user staff. Also for each phase, a final as-built future state process map and final process step narrative were produced, communicated, and distributed upon deployment to agency staff. Prior to deployment, process end users were trained in the new workflow and related expectations. Overall value added as a result of the engagement and implementation for all phases includes application and system enhancements in our Appian and VPINs, or our project information system, embedded triggers to advance closure promptly, elimination of the paper closure memo and its complex data and routing requirements, defined accountability, in other words, defining efficient, the right work, and effective work by the right people, improved process transparency, higher quality deliverables, a shorter time duration in completing the closure handoff to financial operations, a shorter time duration in completing the final voucher handoff to FHWA, streamlined closing of expenditure accounts and contracts, and overall more efficient use of federal and state program funds. An important consideration in process improvement is the ability to track and confirm targeted results. In collaboration with the VTrans Performance Section's data analytics team, agency IT, and project sponsors and champions, performance management dashboards have been developed to meet this business need. Success is measured through the tracking of key performance indicators, or KPIs, and related data metrics. As shown, 3 KPIs were identified for Phase 1, one each having their basis in duration or time, quality, and transparency. A collective KPI dashboard for each phase provides a valuable visual performance management aid. The performance dial for each KPI illustrates the KPI, the basis of measurement for the tracking metric, and the baseline, target, and actual metrics. These valuable dashboard tools support and promote performance monitoring within the business areas and identifying the need for any follow-up engagement if targets are not being met. That concludes the VTrans Closure Project Overview presentation. Thanks again for the opportunity to share our experience with you today. I will now turn it over to our colleagues in Ohio. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having us today. I'm Alana Haberman with the Ohio Department of Transportation with Dan Balsley and Jessica Patterson with FHWA Ohio Division. Today we're going to share our project closeout journey from the initial mapping workshop in 2018 to our finished product. Well, Jessica and I volunteered to have Ohio host this project mapping workshop in March of 2018. At that time, Ohio was experiencing a backlog in our projects. We were about 2,000 in the hole. We knew we had a problem and we weren't very efficient at what we were doing. So we agreed to have the program with this understanding. Again, we didn't know what to expect when we put it together, but we pulled together all the disciplines we thought were pertinent to the projects on the ODOT side, and Jessica pulled together all of our FHWA partners here in Ohio. What we quickly found out was that ODOT Finance was acting as a project manager for all of the project closeout processes. We identified areas of weakness in our communications and in the process, and ended the session with our commitment to improve it globally for the agency. Jessica, did you want to talk about FHWA's role in the closeout?
Yeah, thanks, Alana. Again, from FHWA's perspective, one of the reasons why we were interested in our state participating in the project closeout workshop, the mapping process, was because our performance measure for prompt closeout was around 15%, which was well above what the national target for that performance measure should have been. And even though ODOT is very good with their inactive projects in keeping below the 2% threshold, we did have a number of inactive projects with a zero unexpended balance. And so, like Alana said, they had a lot of backlog. So we really felt like from our side that this would be a really good workshop for us to go through. And our division administrator was very supportive of us doing this workshop. Also, I think if we would go back in time, I think we had all of the right people in the room for the workshop, but I think we needed a little bit more time to prepare. I don't think we really knew exactly what we were getting into, to be upfront about it. So I think if you were interested in doing this, if we could go back in time, the DOT and Federal Highway would have a little bit more upfront meetings prior to the workshop, just to make sure that we had everybody on the same page of the expectations. But it ended up being a really good workshop.
I agree. For full transparency, when all of our folks came to the workshop from the ODOT side, I would bet you 99% of the people in that room thought they didn't have a problem and they weren't part of the process. So we had to really gain that knowledge first, that everyone was part of the process before we could even move forward. The real work started actually after the 4 days. We knew we had to create a whole new system in order to get better at what we were doing. So finance took the lead on it within the agency. We created a spreadsheet, would track our progress with each division, all the conversations, all of the meetings, the follow-up, and we kept the districts involved along the way. We met individually with real estate, environmental, rail, opportunity, diversity, and inclusion, local programs, and construction. We slowly started mapping to the solutions. It was a long year. We kept Ohio Division apprised of our progress along the way, but really it was a full year before we saw any progress of any formulation of a plan. So that was a lot of conversations. This is what our action plan looked like. We had, as I said, this Excel sheet where we tracked our meetings, we tracked goals, we tracked follow-up. We gave ourselves dates to complete certain portions of the plan to make sure we were moving forward. You can see from the plan that we had completion dates that we gave ourselves. We also identified if we missed those dates. We had a section where FHWA was able to offer comments, give us questions to make sure we were working collaboratively towards the end product. There was a lot of things that we didn't realize we needed to address until we were in the middle of the conversation. So this was a very good tool for us to use throughout that year. Jessica, did you want to talk about FHWA's meetings as well?
Yeah, so we knew after the workshop, everyone at ODOT as well as Federal Highway, we knew this was not going to be a quick fix. So we really felt to see progress that we needed to create an action plan after the workshop that ODOT and Federal Highway were both had items that we were going to be accountable for. We knew that was the only way that things were going to progress. So ODOT did a great job of putting together the action plan, but what we also did at Federal Highway is we had a commitment from all of our leadership, our team leaders, the directors, our DDA, our division administrator. Everyone was accountable for this action plan as well. So not only were finance talking, finance took the lead on ODOT side, we took the lead on Federal Highway side, the finance group, but we had a multidiscipline approach. And so we also were having meetings on our side with our leadership to discuss these action items that ODOT was doing and the progress that was being made. So it wasn't just Alana and I discussing this action plan along the way. It was actually our team leaders working with real estate, environment, planning section, our engineering section to make sure that this action item was progressing.
So the key after this, as we went through the process, was really communication and training. Every time we met with a different group, we were showcasing the action items that they were responsible for, and they were required to close a project successfully. What we came across in the interim was FRED. For us in Ohio, FRED is the federal reimbursement end date, the performance end date to the rest of America. We created an automatic email notification for the performance end date to all folks related to specific projects when it was 90 days out. The emails keep coming until they take an action on the project. It's not a friendly email, but it gets the job done. We also added that date to our ELIS, which is our planning system. So now we have full transparency in ELIS that people can find the performance end date successfully when they look at the projects there. And then, of course, our district visits. Dan and I circled the state a few times, meeting one-on-one with every district that we have. First off, to talk about how they close the projects currently, then in developing the new form to make sure that we have the questions answered and a process that was going to be adaptable for all 12 different environments. In looking back, our best practices really started with the commitment from leadership, the commitment from our director, deputy directors, and the Federal Highway Division Administrator to support the change was crucial. Honestly, I don't think we would have achieved it without them backing us and saying that we will make a change. The encouragement from FHWA Ohio Division as continuous follow-up happened. We had a commitment from their program managers to work with the districts and central office on all of our process improvements. And again, always the district training and communication. We found we couldn't talk enough. We are still talking, but we keep moving forward with the project.
And from Federal Highway side, I will echo what Alana said. The commitment from ODOT senior leadership, as well as Federal Highways Division Administrator and DDA ART senior leadership, was crucial. They made it a point that this was a priority. They wanted this to be multidiscipline. They wanted to basically break down those silos that we had. You know, like Alana mentioned, finance was the project manager when it came to project closeout. That's not how we wanted things to work in Ohio. We really felt like we needed the districts to take ownership of the closeout process, and then it should then filter up at the end to our central office finance when they finally wanted to close it in the FEMA system. So having that support from both leaderships was critical. And I really feel like I want to say thanks to ODOT and their director, because without the director supporting it, I think it would have been hard to get a lot of those deputy directors and down to have their staff not only participate in the workshop, but also to be responsive to the action plan and actually do the follow-up work.
Yeah, without that, we wouldn't have completed it because we had to have that commitment. So the challenges, really, as we've mentioned, the first was acknowledging that we had an issue. That first day of the mapping workshop, everyone thought this is a finance issue. It has nothing to do with the rest of the agency. So that was critical. Then we had to get the buy-in from all the divisions on the importance of their piece of the process so that, again, we would have full transparency when they're talking to us about what they had to do and what we needed follow-up from them. The mapping sessions, I'll admit, honestly, some of them were pretty torturous. It took a while to get through them, but then we did and we moved forward. The system changes. We had a talented team of IT development folks on ServiceNow, but it took a lot for us to communicate the nuances that we needed in this electronic system to make it really easy for all of the districts to use in their different environments. And then, of course, the continued training. We trained all the way through the process. We've had several webinars about it. Dan and I continue to check in with the districts to make sure things are still going well now that we've launched. So it is a continued basis. The end results. So where are we now? We ended up developing an electronic ServiceNow application that launched July of this year. It took months of design work to create this universal process that could work for everybody. The education with the districts, again, was vital, and it remains such. And then, of course, we have made it mandatory use for the entire agency going forward, so no one can opt out of this. It really has changed the way that we do project closeouts and getting it to the finance folks.
I think that, again, that's critical from the DOT's perspective, that they made this for a consistency, that they required this process for all of their districts. We were finding out during the workshop that the closeout process was not consistent amongst all the districts at ODOT. So having this be required for everyone for the closeout process, again, I think has been very important and made it successful.
So what we're going to do now is Dan Balsley is going to pull up a live demonstration of our form so you can see how some of the flow works and the questions that we answer when we're getting to the project closeout in finance. So Dan, if you want to take it away.
I'm Dan Balsley, the manager of finance for the Ohio Department of Transportation, and this system here is what we've been discussing. The system here is broken out into 3 sections. We have the create closeout by PID. We have the My Workload, which breaks down a workload for each user that's assigned to this. So if you're signed into the system, it will bring in every project that you're associated or assigned to. And we have this filter querying section, which is broken down by ODOT-let, local-let, non-let, and other programs. We broke it down this way because there are different forms associated with each of these letting types. So we broke them out that way. There's different attributes involved with that, so it makes the filtering and querying easy. And you can filter and query off of any of the attributes within those templates. So anyone can create a closeout, and we'll go in here to create our form. It starts off in this screen, which pulls information from our planning system. This allows the system to identify which template to use. So for this is an ODOT-let template. Wanted to inform you that the start of the form is as soon as construction is complete. So we identified in our closeout workshop with FHWA that the construction portion was identified as being a process that is complete and is excellent and whole. So we do not need to begin the construction or the closeout before construction is complete. So as soon as we get the letter of notice from construction that the project is done, we start this form. So this essentially cleans up all of the other phase work associated with those projects. So the person will go in here, they will assign the sections to each individual, and those individuals will get emails to basically know that they can start work on those sections. There are 12 districts in Ohio, which means that we have 12 different processes to close projects. So when we were creating these forms, we associated all the questions to match or be as vague as we could, the goal being on completing the overall section. So we didn't focus so much on each district's nuances with their process, but the overall goal of closing out that piece or process or section. So I'm going to go through one of these very quickly here, just because they're all in the same similar template. So it generally asks if there was invoices associated with a particular section, and if there are and they have not been paid, then it'll come up with an expected date of payment. So this expected date of payment helps us with things like inactive justification lists, so we can put comments in here. It helps with communicating within the district to know what the delays might be. It helps with notifying us in finance what the delays are. And again, if we have inactive justifications, we can go and look for those. So once each of the sections are signed off on, the status of the form goes from an active to a completed status. Once it goes to a completed status, then that project comes into the finance office and begins the reconciliation process there. So this system basically cleans up all of the other phase work associated with the project in order to give us a project that is complete and ready to be reconciled. If the project has an invoice coming in after it changes the status, then the district cannot unlock this system. They have to actually contact the finance office, which opens the communication with us to inform us to stop our reconciliation process or to reopen FEMA's or whatever it is that we need to do in order to get that piece completed. And we can come back in here and change the status from completed back to active so that the district can make whatever changes they may need to in here. We didn't have a lot of time to go through every aspect of this, so if you would like to go into detail with this, please reach out to Alana and I, and we will happily go through this with you.
Thanks again for having us, everyone. We look forward to taking any questions during the Q&A portion of this seminar.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to all of our panelists for the very in-depth presentations. We're now going to move to Q&A. First question that's come up, I think, is specifically for Ohio about the software. The question is, I apologize, let me just bring it up here. Is Ellis homegrown software or built in a commercially available software product, or kind of a hybrid of both?
Ellis is an in-house product that we use for our, well, it's the planning mechanism or planning software that we have for the whole of the state. So any capital project goes through that Ellis system. So when we made our closeout form, it's any capital project or any Ellis project is going to be included or is required to go through the closeout form. If you're asking about the closeout software itself, it's OnBase was the software we used for our closeout form.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's dive into some questions a little bit. We sort of touched on this with Ohio's presentation, but I'd like to hear from both states about the role of your leadership in planning for and participating in the workshop. How about, the follow-on efforts to improve processes after the workshop? Where did you find champions within your agency for these process improvements, and why?
I can answer for Ohio. We had a meeting shortly after the workshop with the director and all the deputy directors in the agency, and we discussed the importance of the project closeout piece of our construction projects. And so after that meeting, the director actually made the deputy directors the champions, so to speak, are responsible for their different divisions. And so with that, we had our jumping off point. And so we met with the deputy directors, who in turn brought in administrators and the line folks who did the processes we were interested in talking about. And we learned a lot. We learned from everyone that there were process improvements everywhere we turned in the agency, but it started with the top. FHWA Division Administrator, Lori Leffler, was very a strong proponent of having us make sure we were all encompassing. So we really developed from those leadership skills on down to the folks who are doing the actual work.
It's Mike from Vermont. The one necessary challenge of continuous improvement, and understandable challenge, is the ability of operating staff to take the time to step outside of the work they're doing to take a look at their processes. And that requires, as I mentioned in the presentation, a strong commitment from the top down, and that starts with our sponsors. Our sponsors are the ones that really are responsible for deploying the resources to the effort and, you know, taking away any barriers that exist in achieving the outcomes that are desired. Our champions were equally adept at their commitment in keeping project staff on time with their deliverables and their task items, and helping to identify the cross-section of team members that were needed to bring the necessary expertise to the table. So that planning all began in earnest for Vermont on the heels of the FHWA workshop, when the three-phase lean event concept was designed, and the proper team members were identified to bring to those. They were each about a day and a half engagements to see it through, and then having the fortitude really in implementation to stick with it and to achieve the boots on the ground improvements that we've been able to see at VTrans.
Great, thank you guys so much. Next question, which actually dovetails nicely into something that, you know, I wanted to make sure that we mention, and maybe Jeff, this is a question that you can help address, but it says a lot of states are still up against travel restrictions due to the pandemic and really limited in the physical gatherings that they're able to have. Are there opportunities for this to become virtual workshops conducted by FHWA? And from the BATIC Institute side, I just wanted to say that yes, we're enthusiastic about trying to help out in that effort. You know, folks on this webinar who, you know, answered the poll question that their state was not one who had been able to participate in this process already. We certainly are looking forward to funding virtual opportunities to apply this process to specific types of projects or, you know, specific processes. So maybe Jeff, you could address that a bit from the FHWA perspective.
Sure, thanks, Susan. So there's a couple of different things. We have not done a project closeout process mapping workshop since I think it was January of 2020 because of the travel restrictions and everything, and we've been very hesitant to try and convert the workshop into a remote workshop, at least for a big process like Closeout, where it's touching many different departments. And I think Patrick mentioned earlier that there's usually 60 to 80 people in the room. Ohio was similar. I think there was probably 60 to 100 people in the room at any time. So when we're going through the workshop, we just don't think we can replicate that very well remotely for a big process. That being said, we are working with a couple of DOTs on more focused processes and mapping those. So one of those is Colorado DOT. We're going to be doing a kickoff meeting later this month in December. They're wanting to map the utility and railroad program in their state. And so we are going to be doing a remote process mapping workshop with them. We're structuring it a little bit differently, where instead of meeting on site for 2.5 to 3 days, you know, doing the whole workshop, we're going to spread it out probably a couple hours a day, maybe once or twice a week, and do the mapping workshop over a period of time. So we are exploring that. We have had some other discussions with a couple of states, trying to figure out how we might be able to help them remotely in tackling this area of project closeout, but we haven't really committed to doing any kind of remote process mapping on project closeout, because again, it's just such a, it's a big process. The other thing I'd like to mention, and Susan, maybe you could talk about this a little bit, is that hopefully we'll get some interest in this, and maybe we can set up some remote peer exchanges or some way that we can bring together some of the states that are having issues who maybe haven't done a workshop yet with some of the states like Vermont and Ohio who have really gone all the way and made huge process improvements in this area. I think that's kind of what we'd like to do in the meantime before we can be back out and meeting in person.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, absolutely. BATIC Institute would certainly like to help facilitate some of that peer exchange. If there are states participating in today's webinar who are interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm easy to find at showard@ashdo.org. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential here to maybe do some peer exchanges between some of the states that have successfully implemented this with those who are interested in finding out more and seeing how it might apply to them. So moving on to some other questions. This was touched on a little bit, but I wanted to maybe see if we could dive into a bit more about the role of the finance office. Has the finance office across state DOTs been the pressure point where the amount of backed up Alana, you kind of alluded to that in your remarks about sort of the finance office being where the rubber met the road and having to kind of unpack all that with other offices that have responsibility.
We did. So it ended up being that project manager. We were pulling queries from all different sources within the agency, or calling the districts, we're emailing folks. Is it ready to close? Have you done this? Have you done that? Just the prep work of getting it to the financial closeout was extensive. So, and that was, like I said, the very first thing that was evident in our mapping session, that we were that project manager. But again, as you start with any big project, no one really wanted to be that project manager. So we had to work through those logistics to see what the different pieces were and what people would bring to the table. So that was a big issue for us. Now, I'm pleased to say that in the end, we're all caught up now, and the process does work smoothly. so they're all participating. And in fact, I feel like sometimes with these electronic process, because you can see where the form is at, there's a little bit of peer pressure, like they're going, so real estates didn't finish their part of the form yet, but we're ready to go. So they talk it up and then they get it done. So that's one of the good benefits of this form.
In Vermont, one of the primary outcomes for us, I mentioned in the presentation about efficient and effective work. One of the primary outcomes was moving some identification for closure upstream into design with the program managers and out of our business support services section in financial operations to put that back kind of where it belonged and with the folks that would know, and they're more intimate and working with the projects every day. So we took, Jeff mentioned swim lanes on the map. We took a swim lane right off the map with business support services. Not that their work wasn't valued and useful for the outcome, but it was not where it should have been. And that's a tenet of lean is putting the work where it should be with the appropriate staff. So that was an important outcome for VTrans.
This is Patrick. I just want to add to what Mike said. So one thing that I noticed that this whole process was, we kind of stumbled into it, but bottom line is the buck stops with the project manager. And yes, it all fell on the finance folks because Federal Highway was talking to the finance folks to find out where this project is. And so over time, they became the go-to person, and they had to do it all. And they had to do exactly what Ohio was doing, and they were calling people. And so to make this work long-term, that leadership dashboard that Mike showed has a drill down mechanism where every project is assigned to a project manager. And it could be an engineer or it could be civil rights, but it's a project manager. And what we found was over time, it's nature of the beast is there's attrition and people move on, get promoted, retire. Well, here's a good example. Engineer Kirby has 40 projects. Well, really 20 of them are active, 20 of them are in the closure process somewhere. I move on, Mike comes in behind me, not a great handoff, and then he thinks there's 20 projects, not 40. And so those 20 that are in the closure process kind of just fall by the wayside until they hit some kind of list, like an inactive list or something that makes it a priority. And this tracker, this leadership tracker, kind of mitigates that because it always has a current project manager assigned so they can stay up on projects and not get into that massive backlog that we were fighting through 2 years ago. Thank you.
This is Dan from Ohio. Sorry, I just wanted to step in real quick. I want to echo pretty much everybody's thoughts here. I think what Vermont went through there is they identified a couple of spots where they can start being more proactive with their closeouts, and for Ohio it was a different area, and I think that's one of the main important things for this workshop, to identify those points. And for us, I mean, we were doing what Vermont's doing, what I'm sure a lot of you are doing, and just running queries and trying to guess as far as which projects can we close or which ones are hitting our lists and who can we call. But by doing it this way, with this system, everything is reactive. It starts as soon as the efficient process has been completed. So for us, it's construction. As soon as construction's done, we start moving into the closeout process and everything's identified. And we made it versatile enough to where we can change out any individual assigned to any particular section. And we allowed the districts, all 12 districts, do it 12 different ways. So all 12 districts know who's going to be retiring and who's not there anymore, who got promoted, who took over new jobs, and they can always go into the system and search those individuals and then reassign them with pretty easily. But I think that identifying those points is a main focus for this workshop, and it's benefited us greatly.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Let me ask this. Jeff mentioned, having 60 to 70 people in the room. So that leads me to a question, just in terms of what state DOT staff members did you feel like it was most vital to have in the room for these closeout mapping workshops, and maybe to follow up on that, how did the follow through with those groupings or those individuals go? How did you keep them engaged in the process? Maybe we can go to Ohio first and then Vermont.
Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry. So for Ohio, when we went out to our district staff, we had all offices within those districts come to the meetings at once. This allowed everybody to have conversations with each other to identify, oh, I didn't know you did that, or oh, well, when you do this, how come we can't do this? And they were able to, talk to each other and troubleshoot their processes and work through everything that they needed to. Obviously, once we went to the first district, we had a pretty good template, and we tweaked it as we progressed through each of the districts. But starting off, addressing everyone within our district staff, we could say, explain the benefits of this and explain why it's necessary, why it's important. You can get money back to your local agencies faster. You can use money and redirect FHWA funds for other projects, and understand that there is a benefit for closing these out and get that buy-in from them. But that engagement with each and every office within the sections of those districts was vital for us, because we could say, okay, well, here's your completed piece, and when that's done, we're going to pick it up here, or whatever the case may be.
Team formulation for the continuous improvement engagement is critical. Normally we would begin with a fresh mapping exercise on our own of the current state, but what the comprehensive federal highway mapping workshop allowed us to do, I mentioned in the presentation, it had large bookends. It took us right out in the field and construction, right up through basically storage of record copy within our digital storage system. We brought those bookends in from project acceptance to sign off and FEMAS of the final voucher. But what that map allowed us to do was more effectively go out and identify the team members that were needed for each phase. I mentioned stakeholders, process participants, subject matter experts. IT was extremely critical. Their involvement extremely critical in making these changes happen. So I'll give props to the mapping workshop in that regard, because it did help us better streamline the identification of team members going into the follow-on event from the workshop.
I also feel, we mentioned this in our presentation, but we really feel like multidiscipline was the key. I mean, I heard that from Vermont, and I know that from Ohio, and not only from the DOT's perspective, but from Federal Highway's perspective as well. We really didn't want, just ODOT POC communicating to all of their ODOT staff about the workshop. We really tried to have our team leaders and our directors reaching out to our counterparts over at the DOT that we usually work with, so we could get that message out that it wasn't just a finance thing, and that we really were trying to cross-cut different sections, so we knew that we did have all of the right people involved in the process. And to kind of answer the question, we really needed everybody from each of the sections at the DOT for all phases of a project.
If I could just add briefly about the 4-day workshop, things that we didn't know, that we know better now. We thought when we were planning it that it would be a phased approach, like we should have the central office people one day, the district people one day, the non-let folks and local let folks one day. To that point, we really needed everyone all days, because everyone had a different perspective or piece of that process. So it took a little bit longer for us to get all together. We weren't quite that sophisticated, but we got there. But if people were thinking about doing it, you should really have everyone together at the same time to get maximum response from everybody.
Thank you so much. We've probably got time for a couple more questions, so I'll get to a couple of these quickly. Can we talk a little bit about, and whether you've been able to measure this or not? We got a question about the financial impact of the improvement process, the cost benefit analysis, and have you done any looking in terms of those types of implications and how it may have helped your organization?
So for Ohio, when we started the process, we were averaging about $18 million in unexpended balances in the projects waiting to close, and we're down to about 5. So we've realized, roughly a $13 million variance in the federal funds. But for us also, as Dan mentioned, it was working with the locals on the LPA ones. We were backed up, and you don't want to have those phone calls where suddenly a local is owing you, $50,000 at project closeout, and the project closed 2 years ago. So, it was that very real conversation and getting things current and up to date financially that's made it our biggest benefit right now.
Yeah, for Vermont, we did the same thing, and the first year, actually 2020, we actually, the state actually had $10 million more in deobligation funds than in any years in recent memory. So it makes an immediate impact for sure.
Thank you. Here, I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more. Did states identify any issues with meeting the federal end dates due to agreements not getting closed?
Well, in Ohio, as I said, we had the federal reimbursement end date program that started during this whole process. So we were identifying projects that had either no performance end date or performance end dates that were passing, and we were not cognizant of that as an agency. So this brought to light the importance of that, and publishing that date in ELIS, our planning tool, again, made it more visible to everyone at the agency, the importance of that date. So while we were behind, Ohio tended to work to those dates. So while the people in the districts and the divisions didn't realize that, Dan and his group were always working to those dates to make sure we were compliant. Now we're just better because everybody knows what it means.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple here from Ohio that I think we can knock out kind of quickly. How did Ohio tackle the load of zero balance inactive projects, and how many staff members do you have working on Project Closeout?
So we have a staff of really 3 people that work on Project Closeouts. So that's why it takes a while. But we were fortunate that when the project started, we also got the approval and commitment from senior leadership and our CFO that we needed to add additional resources. So for a period of time, we did bring in some contract folks to help us with the workups of the backlog that we had to get us on an even playing field, so that when we finally converted to our new electronic format, we weren't still behind the 8 ball by 2,000 projects. So that helped us. So over the 2-year period, we were able to clean it up, and now we're current. So we could start the process, the electronic process, in July of this year more efficiently.
Okay, thank you so much. In the interest of time, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. We could obviously keep going with this discussion and these great questions on and on. So hopefully we'll be able to find ways to continue to educate folks on this subject in partnership with FHWA. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a big thanks to our fantastic panelists. A reminder to everyone that the slides and video recording of this webinar will be available on the BATIC Institute website in the next day or two, and we'll also try to respond to post responses to the questions in the next few days. Please enjoy your afternoon and continue to visit the BATIC Institute website for information on upcoming webinars and training events in 2021. Thank you all so much.